Today is February 4th, 2026. 6 days. That is all that separates us from what weather experts are calling one of the most dangerous cold patterns in decades. This is Mind Hierarchy, and if you are new, welcome. If you are listening to this, you need to understand that the countdown has already begun. In just 6 days, on February 10th, temperatures across 2 continents may drop to extreme levels not seen in generations, bringing Arctic-level cold hundreds of miles farther south than it should ever reach. And what's stunning is how quietly this threat has been building without most people noticing until now. Just peep this. Orlando, Florida is colder than Juneau, Alaska this morning. Don't see that very often. This was tweeted by meteorologist Colin Gross. It makes you wonder. Is the public starting to wake up? Imagine stepping outside and feeling a cold that takes your breath away in seconds. Not normal winter cold, Arctic cold. The kind that makes your face sting immediately. Fingers go numb even through gloves, where you instinctively know staying outside too long is dangerous. Now imagine that cold not just for one morning, but day after day after day, with temperatures so low that staying inside becomes a challenge if heating systems can't keep up. And it's not just your city. This pattern could affect entire regions across 2 continents at the same time. For our subscribers, welcome back. Before we dive into the new information that has just emerged, information that changes everything we thought we knew about this approaching freeze, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. The next 6 days are going to be critical. You need to be here for every update. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and whether your area typically gets hit hard by winter weather or if it's something that we may need to dig deeper into. Your story helps other viewers understand they're not alone in facing this. Let's talk about what just happened. What broke up there in the atmosphere that normally keeps us safe? Why power companies across multiple countries are reviewing emergency response plans? And most importantly, what your family needs to understand and do before mid-February arrives, and this pattern unleashes its full force on communities that aren't ready. Something massive shifted high above the earth, where most of us never look. Invisible changes up there that took weeks to build are about to crash down on our daily lives in ways that will test every family's preparation and resilience. Weather experts studying patterns in the upper atmosphere started seeing warning signs weeks ago, the kind of signals that appear before historic cold outbreaks. But this time, the scale looked different, bigger, longer, more dangerous. They observed cold air patterns that are rare in modern meteorological records, building pressure like water behind a cracking dam. And they understood that once this pattern fully developed, Arctic air would follow natural atmospheric pathways southward toward areas that haven't experienced such intense cold in generations. You're probably thinking your town stays mild in winter, or maybe you've seen plenty of snowstorms and handled them fine. Or perhaps you figure modern infrastructure protects us better than it used to. But here's what makes this situation different from typical winter storms. The time frame keeps appearing in forecasts. Mid-February, potentially around the 10th, give or take several days. That's when models suggest the atmospheric barrier could weaken significantly, allowing Arctic air to move south with reduced containment, not a quick cold snap that passes in days. Not a single storm that dumps snow and moves on. This looks like wave after wave of the coldest air available on Earth rolling over the same regions for weeks. Each wave arriving before the previous one fully releases, creating a sustained deep freeze that modern heating systems and power grids could face significant strain during extended periods. And because this pattern affects 2 continents simultaneously, mutual aid resources may be limited as many regions face challenges at once. Let me be clear about something before we go further. Weather forecasting, especially long range, involves uncertainty. The atmospheric patterns we'll discuss are real and confirmed by meteorological agencies, but exact impacts on specific locations depend on how this pattern develops over the coming weeks. We're preparing for potential scenarios based on current data, not predicting guaranteed outcomes. Think of this as your neighbor sharing information to help you prepare, not as definite predictions of disaster. But the data is compelling enough that professionals who study weather for a living are taking notice. In January, measurements showed something odd developing over the Arctic. Temperatures high in the atmosphere, 6 to 10 miles up where jets fly, started behaving strangely. Normally, the coldest air on Earth stays locked in a tight circulation around the North Pole, spinning in place like water going down a drain, contained by powerful winds that act as an invisible wall, keeping Arctic cold separated from the milder air over populated continents. But in January, those containment winds weakened, not a little, dramatically. Measurements showed the circular wind pattern that normally howls at over 100 mph slowed to less than half that speed in places, like a fence losing its strength, and warm air from lower latitudes began pushing northward into spaces it never normally reaches. That intrusion of warm air disrupted everything. Think of it like poking a hornet's nest. The cold air mass that had been sitting peacefully over the Arctic suddenly became agitated, unstable, looking for somewhere else to go. And because the protective wind barrier weakened, paths opened southward that are usually blocked. Weather models started projecting something forecasters dread seeing, a complete breakdown of the polar circulation pattern, which would send massive lobes of Arctic air plunging south toward North America and Europe simultaneously, while nothing held them back. The last time this happened was decades ago, and people who lived through it still tell stories about that winter. Most of us miss these early warnings completely, because nothing in our daily weather felt wrong yet. January brought normal winter temperatures, maybe even milder than average in many places. Snow fell and melted on typical cycles. Morning forecasts discussed ordinary things like weekend cold fronts and midweek flurries. Nobody panicking, nobody stocking up. The disconnect between what the data showed coming and what the public knew about it grew wider each day, a gap that always exists before major weather events because the signs appear first in places regular people don't look, in atmospheric measurements and long-range models that take expertise to interpret, and that news stations won't discuss until they're certain enough to avoid looking foolish if predictions don't pan out. But the experts knew. Across weather services in multiple countries, meteorologists discussed the developing pattern in technical forecasts and professional channels. Forecasters compared notes on what they were seeing, confirming the pattern wasn't limited to one model or one region. Emergency management offices received briefings about potential scenarios to prepare for. Power companies got quiet recommendations to check backup systems and fuel reserves. Nothing public yet. Nothing alarming the general population, just professionals doing what they do when data suggests trouble might be building, taking preliminary steps while hoping projections prove wrong, but preparing in case they don't. Last week's odd warm spell in parts of the upper atmosphere, while surface temperatures stayed normal, was the clearest signal yet that the breakdown had begun. Meteorologists call it stratospheric warming, a phenomenon where temperatures miles above Earth suddenly spike, disrupting the wind patterns that contain polar air. It's like a chain reaction in the atmosphere. Once it starts, the process follows physical laws, though exact timing and intensity vary by location. The warming event that triggered this time was stronger than most, pushing temperatures in the stratosphere up by dozens of degrees in just a few days. And the circular winds holding back Arctic cold responded by fragmenting and weakening, exactly as the models predicted they would. Now we're in the waiting period. The atmospheric changes that will drive the cold south have already happened, but it takes time for effects at that altitude to work their way down through the atmosphere and show up in the weather we experience at ground level, usually about 2 weeks, which brings us to mid-February. That's not a guess or a random date someone picked. That's how long the physics takes. The time required for the stratospheric disruption to cascade down through atmospheric layers until it finally reaches the surface and transforms into the bitterly cold conditions people will feel directly. The timeline has a scientific basis that makes it predictable, even while uncertainty remains about exactly how severe impacts will be in any specific location. Big trouble always starts quietly like this, building in ways invisible to casual observation, following rules and patterns that only become obvious after enough time passes to see them clearly. Weather disasters don't declare themselves with trumpets and flashing lights. They develop through subtle shifts in measurements most people never see, accumulating strength while life continues normally below. And then one day, the accumulated energy releases all at once, and suddenly everyone wonders why there wasn't more warning, when the warning was there all along for anyone paying attention to the right sources. We were paying attention. Now you are too. And that knowledge, that awareness of what builds, while others remain unaware, gives you the time and information needed to prepare while preparation still matters. Here's what changes everything about this situation and transforms it from a notable weather event into something that could reshape how people think about winter vulnerability. 2 continents. Same week. Same underlying problem. No way to shift resources from unaffected areas because everywhere gets hit at once. The coincidence of timing isn't random. It comes from the same atmospheric breakdown, triggering cold outbreaks on both sides of the Atlantic simultaneously, like dominoes falling in 2 different directions from the same starting push. Picture this: Chicago buried deep under snow and wind chills that make exposed skin freeze in minutes. London streets turn to sheets of glass under freezing rain that doesn't stop falling. New York airports closed as runways vanish under white, and temperatures drop so low that de-icing equipment stops working effectively. Berlin struggling with black ice that makes every road and sidewalk treacherous, while energy demand spikes beyond grid capacity. These aren't separate events requiring separate explanations. They're different expressions of the same atmospheric pattern, playing out across 2 continents, driven by the same polar vortex collapse that opened pathways for Arctic air to flood south toward both North America and Europe at the same time. Weather teams across the Atlantic find themselves in constant communication, watching the same rare pattern unfold in their respective regions, comparing impacts and timelines and duration predictions. The coordination comes from necessity. When a phenomenon this unusual develops, affecting such a large portion of the Northern Hemisphere, no single agency has all the expertise or experience to navigate it alone. Meteorologists in Oslo compare notes with colleagues in Toronto. British weather officials discuss model results with counterparts in Washington. German forecasters share data with teams in Chicago, everyone working together because the threat doesn't respect borders, and the knowledge needed to understand it comes from combining perspectives across nations and continents. Disasters that ignore borders force a kind of humility on human systems. We organize our world into countries with boundaries and governments and separate infrastructure systems. And mostly, that works fine because most problems stay localized enough that individual nations handle them. But occasionally, nature reminds us that weather patterns operate on scales larger than human political organization, that the atmosphere doesn't care about borders or jurisdictions or which country you live in. When Arctic cold plunges south, it affects everyone in its path equally. A Canadian family and a Norwegian family living at similar latitudes face the same danger from the same atmospheric cause, even though they're separated by an ocean and have no connection except the cold air mass about to bury both their regions under historic conditions. Your friend in Canada dealing with power outages and impossible roads. Your cousin in Germany wondering if heating fuel will last through weeks of deep freeze. Your former coworker who moved to Sweden now seeing temperatures typical of the Arctic Circle. Your sister who lives in Scotland facing conditions the country hasn't experienced in decades. All of them fighting the same battle at the same time against cold that came from the same source, and none of them able to receive help from unaffected regions because there are no unaffected regions, at least not within the parts of North America and Europe where populations concentrate. The usual pattern after major disasters of neighboring areas sending aid and resources and repair crews doesn't work when the disaster covers half a continent or more. Everyone needs help simultaneously. Everyone competes for the same limited supplies of emergency generators and heating equipment and repair materials. Everyone deals with overwhelmed systems that can't respond as quickly as normal because the scale of simultaneous impacts exceeds available resources. Power companies from Texas to Scandinavia check the same troubling forecast maps and run the same calculations about whether their systems can handle sustained extreme cold. They know their equipment has design limits, temperature ranges it's built to operate within, and they know the projected conditions will push right to those limits or beyond. Transformers can fail in extreme cold. Power lines coated in ice and whipped by wind can snap. Natural gas demand for heating spikes exactly when cold temperatures make gas harder to extract and transport. Coal piles at power plants freeze solid. Wind turbines ice over and shut down. Solar panels vanish under snow. Every energy source faces challenges simultaneously. And the backup systems that would normally cover for problems in one area get stressed because problems develop everywhere at once. Grid operators start doing mathematics nobody wants to do. Calculating system capacity and whether controlled rolling blackouts might become necessary to maintain grid stability during peak demand periods. Past storms hit one place hard while other places continued normally. Hurricane devastates one coastline but doesn't affect regions a few hundred miles inland. Tornado outbreak strikes the south while the north enjoys calm weather. Blizzard buries the northeast while the Midwest sees only cold and the west stays mild. The localized nature of most weather disasters, however severe they may be in the affected area, means unaffected regions can send help. Power crews from states that didn't get hit drive into damaged areas and assist with restoration. Emergency supplies flow from areas with surplus to areas with need. People displaced by the disaster evacuate to nearby regions where life continues normally. The disaster is terrible for those experiencing it directly, but the broader system remains stable enough to provide support from outside. This situation breaks that pattern. There's no outside, no unaffected region standing by ready to help. North America and Europe both need assistance at the same time, and while they might share information and expertise, they can't share physical resources or repair crews across the Atlantic. Even within each continent, the geographic scale of affected areas means no large population centers escape impact. Southern states that might normally send linemen north to help with power restoration will be dealing with their own cold-related failures. Western European countries that might send aid east face their own challenges. Everyone simultaneously in the same fight creates a kind of isolation that makes impacts worse and recovery slower than when help can come from outside the disaster zone. That's what makes this dangerous beyond just the weather itself. The cold will be historic, the disruptions will be severe, but the inability to rely on external aid amplifies everything. Communities become more dependent on local resources and local preparation. Families that stocked up ahead of time do better than families that assumed stores would stay open and supplies would remain available. Neighbors who know each other and communicate fare better than isolated individuals. The social fabric of communities gets tested in ways that reveal what's strong and what's fragile, who helps and who hoards, which systems hold up under pressure and which ones collapse faster than anyone expected. Weather history shows that cold outbreaks affecting multiple continents simultaneously are rare enough that most people have never experienced one. The pattern requires specific atmospheric conditions that don't align often. When they do align, the events become markers in time that people reference for decades afterward. The winter, everything stopped. The year we lost power for weeks. The cold that reached places much farther south than typical. Stories passed down through generations because the experience was significant enough to leave permanent memory. We're potentially entering one of those winters now, watching the atmospheric setup develop that could create stories your grandchildren will still tell decades from now about the time the Arctic came south and stayed there long enough to change how people think about winter. But before we dive deeper into what this means practically, we need to understand the human face of sustained cold and extended power outages. Because statistics and forecast maps don't capture what really matters, which is how real families in real homes experience weeks without electricity, while temperatures stay dangerously low and help remains days or weeks away. Consider Margaret, a composite example representing experiences from past severe winters. She lives alone in a small house, 3 miles outside town, surrounded by trees that look beautiful in summer and isolating in winter. Her husband passed years ago. Kids moved to cities for work and visit when they can, which isn't often. Last big snowstorm trapped her inside for 3 weeks because the county plow doesn't prioritize her road and her old sedan can't handle deep snow. Power went out on day 2 of that storm, stayed out for 11 days. No heat except the fireplace she managed to keep going by burning furniture when firewood ran out. No light after dark except candles that made her nervous about falling asleep. No way to charge her phone to call for help. Temperature inside the house dropped low enough she could see her breath. She wore every layer of clothing she owned and huddled under blankets near the fireplace, rationing the wood she had left, wondering each night if she'd wake up the next morning. Neighbors a half mile down the road eventually checked on her when the weather cleared enough for them to walk over. brought hot soup in a thermos and extra blankets, and helped her get the frozen pipes thawed before they burst. Margaret cried from relief and exhaustion. Later, she said the worst part wasn't the cold or darkness. It was the fear that nobody knew she needed help, that if something happened to her, days would pass before anyone noticed. 78 years old, living alone, and the infrastructure most people take for granted couldn't reach her when she needed it most. Doctors who know Margaret's health history worry: heart condition that requires medication and monitoring, medical equipment in her home that needs electricity, blood pressure that responds poorly to cold stress. Another extended power outage combined with bitter temperatures creates serious risk for someone with her medical profile. She knows this, filed emergency paperwork, with the county listing her address as priority for welfare checks during disasters. Keeps extra medication on hand in case she can't get to the pharmacy. Fills water jugs every time the forecast mentions snow. Burns memories of the last time winter turned dangerous. And those memories push her to prepare now while there's still time, because she never wants to feel that helpless again. Consider Hans, another composite example based on documented winter hardship experiences. In a village outside Hamburg, he waits for grandkids to visit like they promised for school holiday. Retired from teaching, living in the same house he bought 40 years ago when villages like his still thrived and people stayed local instead of migrating to cities. Roads narrow there, buildings old, heating systems older. Last hard winter, the fuel delivery truck couldn't reach his village for 2 weeks because roads stayed blocked. Hans burned old chairs and fence posts to keep the stove going, slept in the one room he could heat, door closed to trap warmth. Temperature in the rest of the house dropped so low that pipes froze despite his best efforts, and thawing them later caused flooding that ruined floors. Grandkids might not make it this time if weather turns as bad as forecasts suggest. Parents will keep them safe in the city, rather than risk travel on dangerous roads to visit grandfather in an isolated village. Hans understands this logically, but feels the loneliness anyway. Retirement was supposed to mean time with family. Instead, winter threatens to cut him off again, same as last time, maybe worse. He prepares quietly, extra fuel stored in the shed, food that doesn't require cooking in case power fails, candles and batteries, contact numbers for neighbors young enough to help if needed. Pride prevents him from admitting how much he worries. But worry lives in his actions, in the preparations that reveal what he doesn't say. Consider Keisha, a composite representing single parents in urban settings during winter emergencies. She raises 3 children under 6 in a second-floor apartment. Father left. Extended family lives states away. Neighbors friendly, but everyone struggles with their own problems. Last winter, power went out twice, just for hours each time. But those hours taught her how quickly children get cold and scared in darkness. No backup heat in the apartment, no generator allowed per building rules. When power dies, she has nothing but blankets and body heat to keep kids warm. Baby bottles need warming, formula needs mixing with clean water. Medical supplies for her oldest, who has asthma, need refrigeration. Nebulizer runs on electricity. Weeks without power would force impossible choices. Stay in the cold apartment and risk kids getting sick, or worse. Leave and go where? Shelters fill fast during disasters. Family too far away to reach if roads are bad. The math doesn't work. There's no good option visible to her, just varying degrees of bad, and the helplessness of that reality weighs heavier than the cold itself. She can handle discomfort. She's handled plenty. But the worry about keeping her children safe and comfortable during extended power loss weighs heavily, which is why advanced preparation becomes so important for families. Mother instinct screams to protect her children, and winter storms that cut power for weeks make protection impossible for families without resources or backup plans. These aren't made-up stories designed to manipulate emotion. These are real circumstances that real people face when winter weather exceeds what modern infrastructure handles easily. Margaret exists, Hans exists, Keisha exists, the truckers exist. Names might be changed, but their situations repeat across any region hit by sustained cold and power outages. The elderly living alone, isolated rural residents, single parents without resources, workers caught away from home. These are the people who bear the heaviest burden when weather turns extreme, not because they're weak or unprepared, but because their life circumstances leave little margin for error, and winter disasters consume whatever margin they had. You've watched this far, and that means something. Most people clicked away when weather discussion started feeling serious. You stayed. That tells me you're someone who faces reality instead of avoiding it. Someone who takes responsibility for family safety instead of assuming others will handle it. These next few minutes together, we're going to talk about practical steps that work for regular families with regular resources, not survival bunkers and unlimited budgets. Just normal people doing smart things before conditions turn difficult. Water first, always water first. Human body survives weeks without food, but only days without water. And when pipes freeze or water systems lose pressure, clean drinking water becomes the most critical resource you can't easily replace. Fill bathtubs the night before weather turns. Plug the drain and fill to the brim. One full bathtub provides enough water for a family of 4 for several days if used carefully. It's not for drinking primarily, though you can drink it if needed. It's for flushing toilets, washing hands, cooking, all the things you take for granted until water stops flowing. Fill every available container. Empty juice bottles, cleaned soda bottles, pots, buckets, anything that holds water and can be sealed or covered. Store filled containers somewhere they won't freeze if your house loses heat. When people describe what they wish they'd done before past outages, more water storage appears on every list. Water for drinking specifically needs special attention. If you're filling containers from the tap, that water is already treated and safe. Fill bottles for drinking separately from the bathtub and buckets meant for washing. Keep drinking water somewhere accessible. If pipes burst and flood, you want drinking water protected. If baby formula needs mixing, you need clean water ready. If medication requires water, you need it available. The peace of mind from having abundant water stored transforms the experience of an extended outage from desperate to manageable. You can ration food, you can tolerate cold, but you can't skip water. And stressing about water availability makes every other challenge feel worse. Food comes second. The goal is calories that don't require cooking or refrigeration. Peanut butter provides dense calories and protein without needing heat. Crackers, cereal, canned soup that can be eaten cold if necessary, though it's not pleasant. Canned vegetables and fruit. Protein bars, nuts, dried fruit. Things you'd normally eat anyway, so it's not wasted if the emergency doesn't materialize. Buy extra of what you already buy, and store it someplace easy to access. Don't count on refrigerator or freezer food being available because extended outages mean everything in them spoils within days. Think about family members with special dietary needs. Babies need formula. Elderly parents need soft foods. Medical conditions require specific diets. Stock for actual needs, not theoretical survival. And include comfort foods, cookies for kids, coffee for adults, chocolate. Little pleasures matter enormously during sustained stress, and the small comfort of a familiar treat helps psychologically out of proportion to its practical value. Think about babies if you know families with infants nearby. Extra formula, diapers, baby wipes. Young parents often operate on tight budgets and might not have stockpiles. Offering to share supplies or checking whether they need help preparing might prevent serious problems later. Babies can't wait for supplies to arrive, can't eat adult food, can't tolerate cold as well as older children. Families with infants face higher stakes during extended outages, and communities do better when people without babies make sure families with babies are ready. Power banks for phones and essential devices make communication possible during outages. Fully charged power bank can recharge a phone multiple times. Cheap insurance for staying connected. Medical devices need power more critically than entertainment electronics. Anyone using CPAP machines or oxygen concentrators or nebulizers needs serious planning for extended power loss. Battery backups provide hours, not days. Generator becomes necessary, not optional, for people whose health depends on powered equipment. If you're not in that situation, check whether neighbors are. Older folks especially might rely on medical equipment you don't see. Asking ahead of time whether they have backup power plans opens conversations that could save lives later. Long extension cords let neighbors share generator power. If your generator runs, cords stretched to the next house can power their medical equipment, or let them charge devices, or run a small heater in one room. Community resilience comes from sharing resources rather than hoarding them. You do better when neighbors do better, because isolated families in crisis create problems that eventually affect everyone nearby. Check on elderly neighbors first, today, before weather turns. Knock on doors. Introduce yourself if you haven't met them. Ask if they're prepared for possible winter storms. Offer to help with preparations they might struggle to do alone, bringing in firewood, picking up supplies if they can't drive, programming phone numbers they can call for help. Simple actions that take minutes can prevent tragedy later. Elderly people living alone constitute the highest risk group during winter disasters. They're most vulnerable to cold, most likely to have medical needs, most likely to lack family nearby, most likely to need help, but hesitate asking for it. Checking on them isn't just kindness, it's damage prevention that makes the whole neighborhood more resilient. Car preparation matters more than people realize. Full tank of gas, blankets inside the vehicle, water bottles, snacks, phone charger, basic tools, flashlight. If you get stranded, a prepared vehicle becomes temporary shelter that keeps you alive until help arrives or roads clear enough to drive. Empty gas tanks and unprepared vehicles leave you at risk if you absolutely must travel during dangerous conditions. Roads close unexpectedly. Weather deteriorates faster than forecasts suggested. What should have been a quick trip becomes hours stuck in traffic or stranded on closed highway. The difference between prepared vehicle and unprepared one determines whether that's an uncomfortable experience or a life-threatening emergency. Medication stockpiles help anyone managing chronic conditions. Most prescriptions allow refills slightly early if you explain preparing for emergency. Getting even a few extra days of critical medications provides buffer. If you can't reach pharmacy during severe weather, don't wait until you're down to the last few pills to refill. Do it now while roads are clear and pharmacies are operating normally. Medical needs don't pause for weather emergencies. Heart medication doesn't become optional during storms. Insulin doesn't wait until roads reopen. If you need it daily for health, assume you won't be able to get more for weeks and plan accordingly. This isn't about panicking or living in fear or buying into hysteria. Families who beat big winter storms don't panic. They move quietly and purposefully. They prepare while preparation is easy. They check supplies and fill gaps. They talk with family members about plans if power fails or roads close. They identify the warmest room in the house to retreat to if heat fails. They locate flashlights and test them. They think through what happens if various systems fail and plan responses ahead of time, when thinking clearly is still possible. Then when weather hits, they're ready. Not perfectly. Nobody's perfectly ready. But ready enough that challenges become manageable instead of overwhelming. The difference between manageable and overwhelming determines everything about how families experience sustained emergencies. Let me be blunt about something most people don't want to hear. Our infrastructure was not designed for this. Power grids were built for normal winter conditions, with some buffer for occasional extreme days. Engineers calculated expected cold temperatures and designed systems to handle those temperatures with reasonable margin. What they didn't design for, because it seemed statistically unlikely enough to not justify the expense, was sustained extreme cold-lasting weeks rather than days. The difference matters enormously. Running at peak capacity for a few days stresses a grid, but systems usually hold. Running at peak capacity for weeks exposes every weak point, causes cumulative damage, depletes backup resources that exist for short-term emergencies but can't sustain weeks of crisis conditions. And when the geographic scale means every region needs peak power simultaneously, there's no importing electricity from neighboring areas or borrowing generation capacity from regions using less power than normal. Everyone maxed out at once. That's the scenario grid operators dread most and plan for least, because historically, it happened rarely enough that building infrastructure to handle it seemed economically unjustifiable. Now it's happening, and the infrastructure gaps get exposed in real time. Past storms let power restoration crews move methodically from damaged area to damaged area, fixing problems in sequence. Roads cleared quickly enough that trucks reached work sites within a day or two. Weather improved enough that linemen could safely work on repairs. After each day of work, Significant progress was visible as more customers got power restored. The process took days or weeks depending on damage severity, but forward progress happened steadily. Now imagine a scenario where roads stay impossible for extended periods because snow keeps falling and temperatures stay so cold that road salt becomes less effective. Where power failures continue occurring as fast or faster than crews repair previous failures. Where the geographic scale means crews can't possibly reach all damaged areas quickly because there are simply too many and they're spread too far apart. Restoration becomes triage instead of systematic repair. Keep hospitals running. Keep water treatment plants operating. Keep emergency services powered. Residential areas wait their turn, and some areas wait a long time because the math of available workers versus broken infrastructure doesn't compute to fast recovery. Supply chains built on just-in-time delivery principles, where stores keep minimal inventory and restock constantly, work beautifully during normal conditions. They reduce costs and waste, but they fail catastrophically during sustained, widespread disruptions because no buffer exists. Stores sell out in a day or two, warehouses empty. Replacement inventory can't reach destination stores because trucks can't travel dangerous roads. Even if trucks make it through, loading docks at distribution centers might lack power to operate. The chain breaks at multiple points simultaneously, and restoring it requires everything getting fixed at once, which takes much longer than fixing individual links in sequence. People living in affected areas could find that food and supplies become difficult to obtain if delivery systems face significant disruption, making advanced preparation important. That's different from past storms, where worst case you drove an extra hour to reach an open store in a neighboring area. When the outage area covers hundreds of miles in every direction, there's nowhere to drive to. That's why stories about stores quietly restocking extra inventory before mid-February appear in reports from people watching commercial supply movements. Major retailers with sophisticated weather tracking capabilities see the same forecasts emergency managers see. They run scenarios about what happens to demand and supply chains if projections prove accurate. Smart companies quietly increase inventory at distribution centers while roads are still passable and delivery remains possible. Position extra supplies ahead of the storm, not creating public panic by announcing emergency preparations, just making business decisions based on weather data suggesting above normal demand combined with possible supply disruptions. The preparations happen quietly, precisely because companies don't want to contribute to panic buying that would drain inventory before the actual weather threat arrives. But the preparations do happen, and noticing them offers another signal that organizations with resources and expertise take this seriously. Scale creates problems that single storms, however severe, never generated. When one city loses power, neighboring cities send help. When an entire region spanning multiple states or countries loses power simultaneously, help becomes limited by the absolute number of trained workers and functioning equipment available across the whole system. You can't manufacture more power company linemen or more repair trucks in a few days. You work with what exists, and what exists was sized for normal conditions, plus some surge capacity, not for continental scale simultaneous failures. The gaps between what's needed and what's available become obvious quickly. And those gaps translate directly to people sitting in cold, dark houses longer than they should have to in a modern developed nation. Right now feels normal. You look outside and see winter, but nothing extreme. Streets clear, kids playing outside in yards, cars driving past without trouble. Morning weather report discusses temperatures cold enough to feel seasonal but not brutally so. Maybe a few degrees below average. Nothing alarming. Schools open, businesses operating, life continuing in its familiar patterns. The normalcy feels reassuring. Surely if major problems were building, you'd sense it somehow. The weather would feel threatening. Warnings would dominate news coverage. Something visible would signal that preparation matters. But you see none of that. Just normal January flowing into early February, the same as it always does. Tomorrow looks the same, maybe slightly warmer than today. A moderation in overnight lows. Morning forecast discussing quiet weather patterns and seasonable conditions. Local news covering regular stories. Nothing weather-related dominating headlines. You check your phone between activities and see no alerts. No emergency notifications. No warning suggesting anything abnormal approaches. The quietness reinforces the feeling that maybe this whole situation is being overblown by people prone to worrying too much. Winter always brings cold. Power always stays on, except occasional brief outages. Modern infrastructure handles winter weather. That's literally what it's designed for. Surely you don't need to do anything special. Surely normal preparation suffices. The false calm tricks you into thinking everything will continue just as it has been, comfortable and manageable, and not requiring special attention or effort. That's the danger. Not the cold itself. The cold will be what it will be. The danger is the gap between the quiet normalcy of right now and the sudden severity of what's coming. A gap that leaves no transition period for people to adjust their thinking and take protection seriously. Disasters announced with days of obvious warning signs get better community responses because everyone sees the threat building and has time to mentally shift from normal mode to emergency mode. The threat becomes real in people's minds before it arrives physically. But when conditions remain normal, right up until they suddenly don't, when false calm persists until the moment everything changes, people get caught mentally unprepared. Even when physical warning existed weeks in advance, their brains never made the shift from "things are fine" to "serious danger approaching," because nothing in their immediate experience triggered that shift. Big trouble doesn't call ahead with advance notice the way we like to imagine. Doesn't send polite reminders that you should prepare. Doesn't wait for convenient timing when you're ready to deal with it. Nature operates on its own schedule, driven by atmospheric physics that don't care about human readiness or convenience. The Arctic cold building up there doesn't know you're unprepared. Doesn't know you have weekend plans or work obligations or reasons why now is a bad time for disasters. When the pattern driving it south aligns, it comes, ready or not, warned or not. Believing it or not, the physics happens regardless of your mental state or preparation level. The transition to cold conditions may happen gradually or more quickly, depending on how atmospheric patterns develop. Weather can change significantly over 24 to 48 hours as forecast systems move through. Current forecasts suggest Arctic air will move southward following the atmospheric pattern meteorologists are tracking, though exact impacts will vary by location. Temperature drops hard, wind picks up, snow begins. And once it starts, the atmospheric pattern suggests it won't quickly stop. Conditions may deteriorate as the cold pattern establishes itself over several days. After that, conditions deteriorate day by day without relief, and the contrast between the false calm and the sustained crisis makes the psychological adjustment harder. People keep expecting a return to the normalcy they experienced just days earlier. Keep thinking, surely tomorrow will be better. Surely this can't continue much longer. But it does continue, day after day of cold and snow and power struggles. And the mental expectation of quick return to normal clashes with the reality of sustained emergency conditions, creating stress beyond what the physical hardships alone would generate. Smart families use these calm days differently. They don't question why conditions feel normal, while forecasts discuss danger. They understand the lag time between atmospheric changes at high altitude and weather impacts at ground level. They remember that hurricanes often arrive during beautiful weather before the storm, that tornadoes form under sunny skies before clouds develop, that disasters rarely announce themselves with obvious advanced warning in the hours immediately before they hit. The warning comes in forecasts and data analysis days or weeks ahead, not in the feel of the air the morning of the event. So they prepare during the calm, specifically because the calm won't last. And waiting until conditions turn means preparing in crisis mode under deteriorating circumstances, instead of calmly and methodically while stores remain open and roads stay passable. Filling bathtubs with water takes minutes. Doing it the night before power fails means water available throughout the outage. Doing it after power fails might mean water pressure already dropped and taps produce only trickles or nothing. Buying batteries and candles and non-perishable food today means walking through calm aisles and choosing carefully. Buying them in a panic as storms approach means finding empty shelves and crowds. Checking on elderly neighbors now means calm conversation and helping them prepare. Checking on them after the emergency starts means finding them already in trouble and trying to fix bad situations that could have been prevented. The value of calm day preparation versus emergency day reaction differs by orders of magnitude. These nice days remaining before mid-February aren't bonus time, proving the threat wasn't real. They're the grace period between warning and impact, the precious days when preparation still happens easily and effectively. How families use this time determines whether they face the coming cold organized and ready, or caught off guard and scrambling. The difference between those two states of readiness determines outcomes when conditions deteriorate, determines who stays safe versus who faces danger, who remains comfortable versus who suffers, who helps neighbors versus who needs help from neighbors. Let's talk about what the computer models are actually projecting, because understanding the technical forecast helps you grasp why meteorologists are taking this seriously. Weather forecasting relies on sophisticated computer models that simulate atmospheric behavior based on current conditions. These models divide the atmosphere into a three-dimensional grid and calculate how temperature, pressure, humidity, and wind will evolve over time using the fundamental equations of physics. The models aren't perfect. They can't be, because the atmosphere is chaotic and small errors in initial conditions grow over time. That's why forecasts become less certain the farther out you look. But for major patterns like polar vortex disruptions and Arctic air outbreaks, the models are reasonably good at identifying the general trend several weeks in advance, even if they can't nail down exact temperatures or snowfall amounts for specific locations. Right now, the major forecast models, the American GFS, the European ECMWF, the Canadian CMC, are all showing similar patterns for mid-February. They show a weakened polar vortex. They show lobes of Arctic air extending far south into North America and Europe. They show sustained below normal temperatures lasting not just days, but potentially weeks. When multiple independent models agree on the broad pattern, that increases confidence that something significant is likely to happen, even if details remain uncertain. The models show what meteorologists call a negative Arctic oscillation, or AO pattern. The Arctic oscillation is an index that measures the strength of the polar vortex. When it's positive, the vortex is strong and cold air stays locked up north. When it's negative, the vortex is weak and cold air spills south. We're heading into a strongly negative AO phase, one of the most negative values projected in years. The models also show a negative North Atlantic oscillation, or NAO, which affects weather patterns over Europe. A negative NAO typically brings cold, blocked weather patterns to Europe, with high pressure over Greenland steering cold air southward. The combination of negative AO and negative NAO creates conditions favorable for sustained cold on both continents simultaneously. These aren't fringe predictions from unreliable sources. These are mainstream meteorological indices used by weather services worldwide to characterize large-scale atmospheric patterns. The ensemble forecasts, which run the models multiple times with slightly different starting conditions to account for uncertainty, show a high degree of agreement on the general pattern, though individual ensemble members vary in exactly how cold it gets and how long it lasts. That spread in the ensemble tells us there's still uncertainty about severity, but the overall trend towards sustained cold is robust across most scenarios. Temperature anomaly maps show projected departures from normal ranging from 10 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit below average across large portions of North America and Europe during the mid to late February period. Those are significant anomalies, not record-breaking necessarily, but well into the range that causes serious impacts on infrastructure and daily life. Snowfall forecasts are less certain because snow depends on moisture availability and storm tracks, which are harder to predict weeks in advance. But the pattern favors repeated opportunities for snow as cold air masses interact with moisture sources. The Great Lakes region could see significant lake effect snow. The East Coast could see nor'easters. Europe could see Atlantic storms bringing snow and ice. Wind chill forecasts show dangerous values, with wind chills potentially dropping to 20 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius or lower in some areas. At those temperatures, frostbite can occur in minutes on exposed skin. Duration is the key concern. A few days of extreme cold is manageable. Weeks of it test systems in ways they're not designed to handle. The models suggest the pattern could persist through most of February and possibly into early March before the polar vortex restabilizes and milder air returns. That's a long time. Long enough for cumulative impacts to mount, long enough for infrastructure to fail, long enough for supplies to run short, long enough for people to get desperate. Now, models can be wrong. They've been wrong before. And there's always hope that this forecast will bust, that the pattern will shift, that something will intervene to prevent the worst-case scenario from materializing. But betting against the models when they show this much agreement is a risky gamble. The prudent approach is to prepare for what they're showing and hope you don't need it, rather than ignoring the forecast and hoping for the best. Let's look at history, because understanding past events helps us grasp what might be coming. The winter of 1976-1977 is often cited as one of the coldest and most severe in modern American history. A persistent pattern of Arctic air locked in place over the eastern United States for months, bringing record cold and heavy snow. Natural gas shortages developed. Schools closed for weeks. Industries shut down. People died from hypothermia and carbon monoxide poisoning from improper heating methods. The winter of 1978-1979 brought similar conditions, with massive snowstorms and prolonged cold affecting much of the country. In Europe, the winter of 1962-1963 was one of the coldest of the 20th century, with temperatures far below normal for months and widespread disruption. More recently, the winter of 2013-2014 saw repeated polar vortex disruptions that brought extreme cold to North America multiple times. And just a few years ago, Winter Storm Uri in February 2021 brought catastrophic cold to Texas and the southern United States, causing widespread power failures and hundreds of deaths. These historical events show us what's possible when atmospheric patterns align to send Arctic air far south and keep it there. They show us that infrastructure fails, that people suffer, that modern society is more fragile than we like to believe when faced with sustained extreme weather. But they also show us that communities can survive, that preparation matters, that people who take warnings seriously and act accordingly fare better than those who don't. The difference between 1977 and now is that we have better forecasting. We can see this coming weeks in advance. We have time to prepare in ways people back then didn't. The question is whether we'll use that time wisely. 9 days remain. February 10th approaches whether we're ready or not. You've watched this far, which means you're taking this seriously. You understand the threat. You know what's at stake. Now it's time to act. Make a list. Check it twice. Water, food, medications, heat sources, communication devices, supplies for vulnerable family members. Talk to your neighbors. Check on the elderly. Share information. Build community resilience. Don't panic. Don't hoard. But don't wait either. The calm days are ending. The countdown has begun. And when February 10th arrives, when the Arctic air starts its southward march, you'll be ready. Not because you panicked, not because you gave in to fear, but because you listened, you prepared, you took responsibility for your family's safety. And that's what separates those who survive comfortably from those who barely survive at all. The cold is coming, the pattern is set, the physics is in motion, but you're ready now, and that makes all the difference. Stay warm in the days ahead, stay prepared, stay connected with people who'll check on you and people you'll check on. Community survives better than individuals. Prepared families survive better than unprepared ones. Calm awareness serves better than panic or denial. You have all three now. Use them well, and come back here as weather develops, because we'll track this pattern together and share information that helps everyone navigate whatever the coming weeks bring. This winter could become one that meteorologists study for years. Let's write ourselves into it as people who saw it coming and prepared and helped others do the same. That's who we are. That's how we face challenge together, prepared, unafraid, ready.